Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to all of our viewers and listeners from Friends of Europe's Critical Thinking Live, part of our Transatlantic Climate Dialogue. Today, we're going to be looking at climate tech for clean transport. This is our second in the series, which is supported by the US mission and part of our European Young Leaders Programme, where we've been aiming to ensure that we bring innovators, entrepreneurs, those who are looking at the big ticket, knotty, ugly issues of climate action, but from a different vantage point, thinking about innovation, thinking ways in which you can create a different systemic approach to tackle one of the biggest issues of our times. I have five brilliant speakers, contributors, who are looking at the issue of transport from various vantage points, whether that's to do with electrification, whether that's to do with actually thinking about data, whether that's thinking about aviation. We have everything for you here this afternoon, and I hope that we're able to really engage you in this interesting dialogue, and that will spur you to engage further in what we're doing on this series, but also some of the work we're doing around climate action more broadly at Friends of Europe. So just a few kind of remarks by way of introduction. What we do know is that transport, or rather the transport sector, and I have this information from me, has the highest reliance on fossil fuels and accounts for over a third, 37, nearly 40% of CO2 emissions from end-use sectors. We know that the transport sector, has seen greenhouse emissions increase. Unlike areas, it's been roughly 25% of EU's total GHG emissions. And we've seen that actually in terms of transportation across the piece, this is data from 2019, that transportation represented 57% of the world's oil demand. So these facts, and we get these facts a lot in terms of, the pending doom through the IPCC reports, but we know at the moment we have an energy crisis. We know what transportation needs to do. And we know that actually, if we were able to really craft and reimagine transport and mobility in the future and make it carbon neutral, the win on that, but also what we could do in collectively, globally, addressing climate action and addressing climate change would be phenomenal. However, let's turn to some of the innovators who've done some marvelous and interesting things. I'm going to first start and go to Sweden. This is not the Eurovision Song Contest, but this is very much in line with how some of our countries are doing some amazing things. And I want to welcome William Bergh from Sweden. And you're the founder and CEO of Kling Systems. Tell us what you're doing and how it is contributing to, how we electrify the EU's transport system.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me. My name is William Bergh. I'm the founder of Kling Systems. What we're doing is looking at how can we make the electric revolution sustainable. And so the electric revolution is predominantly powered by lithium-ion batteries, and they're not really consumed when they're used, but they leave remaining value. So you can reuse the energy at the end of life, you can repurpose it. You can build a stationary energy storage powering renewable energy, for example, out of an old electric vehicle, or you can recycle the battery and you can extract the raw materials. You can put that back into producing new ones. So the question is, where are the used batteries and what are those remaining values, and where should each and every battery go? So what we do at Kling Systems is we're building this B2B market platform that helps car dismantlers, scrapyards, insurance companies, OEMs to get every used battery to where they should go. So we're building a B2B market platform. We're building a battery database so that we know which batteries has which chemistries in them, have which energy specifications. And so what we're doing basically is that we're mapping out where used batteries are out of electric vehicles, electric scooters, electric airplanes, or whatnot. And we map what are the resources in those. And so what our mission is to build the world's first online mine, where we can support the mining industry, but actually mining the batteries that are already produced. So we're kind of helping to make the electrification of transportation or the transport system climate neutral, but just closing the loop of lithium-ion batteries.
Excellent, really brilliant niche idea, but also, why wouldn't you do that? I suppose one of the things I'd like to bring you back on in a moment or later is what kind of traction you're getting from policymakers. Because, when Šefčovič was in charge of climate change, etc., as commissioner, and now he's vice president, putting plans for one of the largest battery farms, if I can call it that, in Europe, acres and acres of it. And it's interesting to see how that links to what you're suggesting and what kind of response you're getting from, if I can call it, the marketplace. I'm now going to go to France. France, Thibaud, thank you very much for joining us. Now, this is we go from looking at how we almost repurpose and recycle batteries to data. You're doing some interesting things that help us use intelligence and what I call that data to push the dial on climate action. Tell us a little bit about what you do at Vianova that helps this happen.
Sure. So hello, and thanks a lot for having me. So I'm Thibaud, the CEO and co-founder of Vianova, the trusted platform for mobility intelligence to achieve carbon zero and vision zero. So with Vianova, the idea is that everybody can analyze, visualize, and share mobility insights to make transport safer and greener. So basically, we provide the operating system of the public realm, working with cities and mobility providers in order to better distribute and control the access to public space. So the data platform that we developed enables seamless exchange of information between, on the one hand, mobility providers, and on the other hand, cities, regarding traffic and curbside management. So for the past few years, so we were created in 2019, our work has been supporting low carbon mobility solutions, such as micro and shared mobility, which helped removing little by little the cars out of the equation in cities. So through our mobility intelligence platforms, which is today used by 60 forward-thinking cities and multiple leading operators, mobility providers across the globe, Vianova has been enabling more cycling lanes, more dedicated mobility hubs, and progressively started removing cars from city centers. So today we ingest data from hundreds of thousands of trips on a daily basis across 60 major cities worldwide, and from hundreds of mobility providers. And thanks to that, we believe that we have created a significant understanding on how to transition more citizens to sustainable, space-efficient, and human-scale modes of transport.
Thibaud, just reference 3 big cities that you're working with.
Yeah, sure. So we are working with the city of Zurich in Switzerland, with the city of Stockholm in Sweden, and with the city of Brussels in Belgium.
Good to know. Thank you. Again, I'm going to come back to you with the same kind of issue about how, you've clearly 60 cities across the world, right? You say, and how do you get into a tipping point where this becomes huge and big and is supported by policy action and potential government subsidy to scale up? But let's come back to that in a moment. I'm going to go to Spain. Eva, very warm welcome to you. And then we're going to go, we've gone from recycling data, and now we're going to actually mobility provider itself. And so you're doing something really interesting, Eva, in terms of working with employers to improve, I suppose, employees' carbon footprint in their mobility. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing with BusUp and the kind of impact you're having.
Thank you, Dharmendra, for having us today here. It's a pleasure. It's curious because it took us a pandemic and a war to understand which is the real cost of commuting for employees. We have realized that there is a high economic cost, high environmental cost, and high personal cost because of the time we spend on a daily basis commuting. And employees have said very clearly all over the globe that they don't want to pay anymore for those costs. On the other side, we have employers that understand the importance or the high cost that the employee pays for that, but they are also willing for them to return to the office at least partially. And they are also willing to offer alternatives, to sustainable alternatives for the commuting of their employees. However, when these companies are located outside city centers and there is no public transportation, the only alternative tends to be the car. And this is the reason why we have 70% car dependency in greater metro areas outside city centers. So what we do is help these companies that are willing to find more sustainable alternatives to offer shuttle services for the employees. And you can say, well, this already exists, but this service was typically used by large companies with high amount of employees because density, high density staff, it's critical to make the investment and reach cost-effective ratios, right? But even large companies today have smaller headquarters and they cannot afford to have that. You can have Google in Silicon Valley, they can have 300 buses, but Google in small sites in Europe, they don't have that because they are not large enough, okay? So our suggestion was, why, if we digitalize the service and we optimize it, adapt it to the real needs of the employees, and allow these companies that typically are in the same areas, concentrated in industrial or business parks, then they can share those services, offer more routes and more options for the employees with a lower cost per passenger in all terms. Cost, when we think about cost or we talk about sustainability, we think about the whole spectrum of sustainability in terms of economics and emissions and the time. So if you have more routes can be shorter, more direct, and have a less personal cost on you. So this is the solution.
Eva, make it real for me. Give us, and for our viewers and our listeners, give us some numbers and actually what does, let's say an employee do? So what is it that you do to enable that person to choose that option? And what kind of numbers are you reaching?
The issue is that if a company cannot have a full bus with all seats, like more than 50 seats all occupied, the cost per passenger tends to be very high. But if you get a 70% occupation, the cost per passenger is extremely low compared to car. It's 1/3 of a car minimum. Okay, so it's very cost effective for the company to pay you for 1/3 of the cost of what a car would cost you. Okay, so it makes sense. But the critical issue here is have high occupation levels.
Yeah.
And typically one company by themselves, it's difficult to have many routes with high occupation. However, if there are several companies in the same area and they typically are in the outside of city centers, it's more effective if they share those routes because employees, tend to have the same kind of employees, they come from the same neighborhoods, so it's more efficient to do that. And we have several examples in Europe and in the United States of companies that are sharing these services. Even in Brazil, what we have is, for instance, companies in outside Barcelona, when one company has 10 routes and they have lots of empty seats. What they do is they rent those empty seats to companies nearby so employees can access those seats and make reservations and even make bookings. I will be in the office tomorrow, so I need a seat tomorrow, but I don't need it the day after. Okay. Because I'm on a hybrid work model.
Yeah.
And this is efficiency at the end of the day. It makes things sustainable.
Great. And are you national? Are you all over Spain, or are you very based around the metropolitan, like Barcelona, Madrid, etc.?
We are in the metropolitan areas of big cities. However, there's sometimes industrial sites in remote areas, like north part of Spain, that we also operate. Or in Brazil, for instance, we are in more than 7 states.
Wow.
Because you have distribution centers, for instance, areas with a lot of warehouses, logistics that are not typically on large metropolitan areas, but they are in strategical points, geographical points of a country. Those areas are also important for us.
Excellent. Eva, thank you so much. Again, I'll come back to the classic question about traction, and scale in terms of policy. Now, last but not least, we're going to go to the United States. We have a co-founder of Ampaire, who's been doing some amazing things around aviation and how to make aviation clean and consumable. So it's great to invite you to join us, Kevin. You're CEO and co-founder of Ampaire. Tell us a little bit about how you're achieving that goal of making air transport, aviation clean and green. And tell us a little about that. I think we're all going to be fascinated in terms of what you're doing in terms of your models. Over to you, Kevin.
Sure. Thank you for having me, and it'd be my pleasure to share this with you. So aviation has some very significant challenges ahead of it. It's about 3% of global emissions, about 1 billion tons of CO2 emitted into our atmosphere per year. But it's also one of the modes of transportation that's the most difficult to decarbonize. There is no currently at-scale solution for the industry. And it takes quite a bit of investment in innovation in actually transitioning this industry. So this is where we founded our company, Ampaire, to take advantage of an opportunity, a technology megatrend that we see in electrification, and to bring all of that great electric vehicle technology from its applications in the ground transport sector over into aviation, and to thoughtfully deploy that tech to decarbonize the industry and to bring some other significant benefits. So the kind of benefits that you see when you incorporate electrification into aircraft, you see a significant reduction in the fuel burn and the emissions that come out of those planes. In a fully electric application, of course, you nearly null out those direct emissions. But even in the hybrid electric applications, which we're beginning with, you're reducing fuel burn by about 50%. You're reducing the noise from communities. In fact, did you know that aviation is the only form of transportation here in the United States that the smaller airplanes still use leaded fuel? So we're able to eliminate all of that leaded fuel and really drive toward a lower pollution, lower burden for community opportunity. But some of the benefits there are about increasing accessibility. So Eva mentioned a bit about the cost per seat mile and aggregation of customers. And the reason that airlines oftentimes struggle to serve small communities is because the cost of flying a plane is so great, you can only justify flying between the major hubs. Yeah. When we electrify these planes or make them hybrid electric, we give beneficial economics that actually allows you to downsize those planes and fly smaller planes at higher frequencies to more destinations, serving more people than ever before. So the way we're approaching this at Ampaire is we are upgrading existing airplane types with hybrid electric propulsion systems that deliver cleaner, quieter, lower cost to operate flights for everybody and better for the environment.
And what scale are you at in Ampaire, Kevin? In terms of, are you working with the big five in the United States, or how what is it? Who are you working with?
Sure. So the planes that we've been flying for the last 3 years have been Cessna Textron planes. These are relatively modest-sized planes, so think 10 or 20 people inside of the aircraft. This is where it begins, and then that technology scales from those smaller planes up to the much larger planes. But there's still a very commercially relevant and valuable position for those 20-seat type planes.
Great, Kevin, thank you. I'll come back to you, and I'm going to ask all of you. Thank you very much. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating what we've just heard from all of you. I'm going to talk to you about that one challenge that's stopping you from, going further, in terms of scale. What's that kind of big obstacle or the ramp that's stopping you from being able to engage with policymakers to really upscale what you're doing, or forget policymakers, what's stopping you from actually going global or scaling within a region? So Eva, if I can come to you first, what's that one thing that you think would either make a difference from policymakers, or the one thing that you need to see happen to go to a different scale?
I would say employee benefits. on commuting solutions, sustainable commuting solutions. This is something we find in some countries, but not in others. We find this in the United States, where our service is considered an employee benefit and has tax deductions, okay, for both for the company and the employee. You would have similar things, situation in Brazil, but it's difficult to find this kind of benefits in Europe beyond public transportation. But those employees that are located in areas that have no access to public transportation have no access to this kind of benefits. Mm-hmm. If we are willing to put tolls into the city, in the access of the city, and low emission zones in city centers, forbidding citizens to access city centers by cars, personal cars, we need to offer an alternative. And incentives in terms of employee benefits for sustainable commuting options would really make a difference, in my opinion.
And would that come, do you see that something that comes from government, or rather working in, do you see that as a government action that you'd like to see happen? Okay, great. Yeah, great. Eva, thank you very much. Thibaud, if I come to you, the same question. What's that one barrier, obstacle, challenge that's stopping you from like really going to scale on this brilliant, data based analysis for policymaking?
Yeah, sure. So I would say first, on the one hand, for sure there is a technical challenge, especially through the integration of large data sets. And on the other hand, there is a regulatory challenge, especially with all the questions regarding data sharing. So on our side, and for the past 3 years, we had to develop continuous efforts in order to educate the European market on the digitization of traffic management and enforcement, as well as mobility data sharing, so that the different stakeholders of the mobility ecosystem learn and get more comfortable making data-driven decisions.
Okay, William, same question to you. What's that one?
It's quite funny. The regulations governing end-of-life vehicles, it was launched in 2000s, and it didn't really include electric vehicles. And it hasn't been updated since. And same thing with batteries. It was launched in 2006, and it didn't include lithium-ion batteries. So the batteries we put in electric vehicles, there's no clear rules for anything really. So we see now that the battery regulations are being updated, and they were supposed to be launched January of this year. Let's see if they come this year or next. Same thing, hopefully, with the end-of-life vehicle regulations. And so what we're all looking for in the entire industry, some kind of rules book. There's very few rules or legislations or regulations to kind of hold each other kind of accountable for. And so what this does is that it makes no one really can bet on the industry and where it's going to head. So we're all kind of waiting and looking and seeing where this is going to head up. But so we're super excited for this new launch of the new battery regulations and also the new battery end-of-life vehicle regulations.
Great, but let's hope they don't make the same mistake of only thinking about that rather than the horizontal connectivity of what.
We can all wish.
And let's all wish for a different kind of, let's say, cross-silo thinking in policymaking, but you never know. Kevin, what about you? What's that one thing?
Sure. Well, if you look at most legislation and most initiatives around sustainable transportation, the vast majority up until now don't even include aviation. It was only relatively recently in this transition that people began even thinking that it was possible to look at decarbonization solutions for aviation. So this is one of the early challenges that we ran into when we would speak with people who believed deeply that we were doing something meaningful, but yet it wasn't part of their charter to support aviation. Charging station infrastructure is for mid-size, heavy-duty fleet vehicles on the ground, not yet for aviation. And so that's a transition point which we're emerging into at this stage. Certainly has been one of the challenges. And then as you've heard from others, you have a technology and a regulatory challenge along the way. For us in particular, in a highly regulated industry like aviation, where safety is absolutely critical, you have requirements on the supply chain and on the technology which are beyond what the ground transportation sector requires. And that means that we have to build out a resilient supply chain of companies who are delivering products that may have begun in ground transportation, but ultimately need to be tested to a level for flight. And now that bridging between two separate industries and that supply chain is one of the other challenges that we have that we've taken on in order to bring safe products to market efficiently. But I will say we've been very successful with this. We've flown over 20,000 kilometers hybrid electric already. And so we have products that we've taken that technology and deployed it. Now it's just about continuing to prove out that technology, that it's safe, reliable, and good enough for us and all of our families to fly on.
But what kind of response are you getting from the big companies, though? Are they looking at you and thinking, evil, bad person, you're going to kill my industry?
No, I think that, people now are seeing the writing on the wall that this transition is happening. There's a question for those very large companies on what role do they want to play. Most large aerospace companies are relatively risk averse and might sit back and watch, plan on doing long-term research and development investments. If you look at the Airbuses of the world, are doing significant work in research and development into sustainable aviation, with plans to enter into service in 2035, 2040 type timeframes. We don't want to wait that long. And so we will work ahead of the curve relative to those other companies. And then when they get serious about developing and delivering products, I'm sure we'll be working together or perhaps competing with them.
Okay, while I'm going to ask both William and yourself this question. We've seen, over the past couple of decades, 3 decades, we've seen that, taking action on climate change, like, moving to organic food was very much a middle class sport. Go to supermarkets, it was the most expensive counter. We've seen a bit of change in that, right? But still, it's far beyond what poor people on low income can afford, even to this day, in terms of making the right choice. How do you create a sustainable, affordable, but scalable model? Almost like, if I can use 2 UK references, the Ryanair and the EasyJet model, right? That kind of scale-up opportunity where suddenly 2 entrepreneurs decided, we can use old planes, but also we can decrease the price and do something magic. And there, voila, hundreds and millions of poor people or people on low income suddenly discovered the world, or especially discovered Europe, and in parts made it into horrible cities, unfortunately. But hey, it's about choice. Tell me from your perspective, what do we need to see happen for those kind of moments from your perspective in terms of aviation and transport on the ground? Kevin,
yeah.
So for aviation, the benefit of decreasing the fuel burn, which oftentimes is 30 to 40% of an airline's operating budget, decreasing that fuel burn by 50% in a hybrid electric means that you're able to significantly lower the cost per passenger mile or passenger kilometer that you fly. Decreasing that means that you can decrease the ticket prices, means that you can fly the planes to more of these communities in a more convenient way, and in fact creating a much more financially accessible and physically accessible aviation industry. And so this is where we, in the United States, the kind of the middle of the country sometimes gets called the flyover states, that you fly from West Coast to East Coast and back, but you skip this middle part. Yeah. Why? And it shouldn't be that way. We should be able to profitably and positively serve all of these communities without harming either the communities or the environment. And that's really what electrification provides here, especially because of that cost reduction.
Indeed. Let's hope there's some ambition and vision amongst policymakers to see that idea and see how they can create the patient capital, if you like, for that to fly. No pun intended. William, over to you. From your perspective, in terms of mobility and transport on the ground, what's your sense of what would you need to have in place for this to kind of really become affordable but scalable?
One of the key issues is looking at what's the remaining value of a used electric vehicle, but also used electric plane or used any kind of electric battery-powered device. And it comes down to looking at what is the second-hand value. We see cars are being sold second-hand, third-hand, fourth-hand. We have several buyers, and this second-hand value is creating is enabling buyers to actually invest in a vehicle. Today, it's very hard, if possible, to kind of set a second-hand value of electric vehicles. So, and an electric vehicle is predominantly up to 70% of the used vehicle values is in the battery. So if you can determine the battery value, you can definitely make it easier for first-time buyers to invest in electric mobility.
Because at the moment, still, I haven't seen it. I know India probably leapfrog everybody else because they've created the smallest, 1,000 pound car, or made by Tata. But we're still not seeing electric cars being affordable to ordinary middle-income, low-income individuals, and it feels like it's a stretch before we'll get to that point. I want to move to keeping with the theme of affordability and I suppose access. Eva and Thibaud, can you say a little bit about how do you overcome the challenge of trying to reach digitally excluded or digitally poorer communities, given what you do? Because when you think about it, vast majority of communities that are both in rural areas, but also some of the urban communities are not digitally literate, savvy, or accessing the kind of benefits that you and I would take for granted. Eva, over to you.
Yes. This is very typical in some part of our client base, which have low-income employees, and they don't have email, they don't digitally wise. So what we do is our services are digitalized for the company, and it's the company who makes them available on a non-digital way for the employees. Like you can check in on the bus with your phone, your QR code, or you can print that QR code and put it in your badge, your employee badge. You can have inform the HR department in your company which route you're using and which days you're using it, and then they can have the information logged into the system. So what we are doing is we gave them access through the corporate, through our client, and they, thanks to this service, they can access more employees in more distant areas and retain them in a more economical way thanks to the services. So it's a win-win situation between the employee and the employer.
Okay, that's a good idea and a good model. Let's see if others that watch this can take this up, if you like. Thibaud.
Yes. So on my side, I think that whether we are addressing mobility providers or local governments, I would say that communities that are digitally less developed can actually sometimes be seen as better positioned to embrace this digitization since they don't have any legacy burden to cope with. So they can literally, as you said, leapfrog. It means you can start from scratch and build clean, neat systems. Thanks to a solution like Vianova, which is SaaS, so software as a service, and self-service. Any kind of community can actually get started in a matter of minutes, as long as they have an internet connection. So otherwise, if you are addressing a segment that is already digitized, you often need to plug in with their existing systems, infrastructure, and workflows, and sometimes it can really be difficult.
But you talked about being in Brussels. I'm just thinking, some of the, let's say, less well-off areas where we've got more ethnic minority, Black and ethnic minority, migrant communities, where English is also not the first language, and their proficiency of digital use is very, very poor. Are you able to access that kind of community in what you're doing at the moment?
So yeah, actually, some cities and mobility providers that we are working with are using the platform in order to make sure there is a good distribution of mobility solutions across their territories, and especially with a focus on poor neighborhoods, for instance. So thanks to our platform, they have the possibility to set up minimum thresholds for fleet sizes in order to make sure that these mobility solutions are not concentrated into rich neighborhoods, for instance.
Okay, great. Now, I take it none of you know each other, right? You've never met before, have you? This is not a personal question. It's a policy-related one, I promise you. No, because I was just thinking, imagine if we created a sandpit with all of you and multiples of you. The power of that magic in terms of thinking about the different aspects of the value chain, but also the infrastructure for solutions around green tech and mobility would be vast. Have you been involved in anything like this? I suppose from our perspective, we're a think tank, and part of this is to be able to show the outside world that you exist. This is what you do, but how can we help to make sure we join up the dots, make the connections, so we can create the kind of change in policy over time? So I would be interested in just getting your reflections about would that be an opportunity you'd seek? Would that be helpful to you, in terms of transatlantic, or even some sort of sandpit facility that says to you, I'm doing this, but actually I haven't thought of that ever?
Yes, I think it would be very helpful, because typically the kind of companies that are more capable of doing some kind of lobbying or policy changing is large corporations, right? They have much more resources and much more accesses, and typically they do it through trade associations that engage them all and have very deep pockets. Whereas startups like us, it's very difficult for us to engage in those activities. So yes, I would say that aligning the interest of startups in a specific sector and work together toward policy changing would be a very important idea.
Great, thank you. Thibaud, briefly?
I totally agree, and this is one of the reasons why at Vianova we had to, and we decided to hire a head of policy within our team when we were just like 10 people. But more generally, I would say that I think policymakers should look at simplifying our regulatory environment rather than complexifying it. In the past decades, it seems that we have been piling up policies and rules, and sometimes it makes them unreadable or understandable when not simply counterproductive. So I would say that policymakers need to focus on empowering the doers.
Okay.
One good example that comes to my mind is that in terms of mobility data sharing, for instance, today we have multiple mobility data sharing standards across the US, such as MDS, GBFS, GTFS, which are today widely used worldwide. And we have other data sharing standards like NetX, Siri, etc., which are sometimes competing against each other, or even generating further complexity for the mobility ecosystem.
Well, thank you. Very good idea. William?
Yeah, I think the more we communicate and share ideas, the more we learn, but also the more we spark new people to enter. I think there's so much talent out there that can, tap into there's so many problems to attack and to solve. And there's definitely more than we have people in basically the entire space at the moment. So the more we talk and do, the more we spark each other, but also new talent.
Great, thank you. Kevin?
Absolutely. So we actively have been participating in industry groups, cross-border, international organizations, which help set policy standards, safety standards, technology standards, and to Thibaud's point, to simplify, to align, to find similarity across borders is incredibly important. Otherwise, you just have more regulations, more nuance to handle, and that ultimately slows down progress. So it's about collaborating and finding alignment in those areas that's most critical.
Absolutely. I suppose from my point of view, policy is important, but creating that sandpit that brings many of you, the multiples of you together, gosh, can you imagine the magic that could come out of that? Let's see if those of you who are listening, and some of our members who are big companies, and let's see if the DG Klima, Director General Klima, and other environment departments are listening and see this as an opportunity, because it would be great to bring some of you together. I have one last question to all of you, because I think it's irresistible, because of what you do. What do you think is going to be the future of mobility? You put it in your own timescale, whether it's the next 5 or 10 years. What do you think it will be? So I'm going to start with Thibaud.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there were a lot of changes brought by COVID-19 and the EU Green Deal, which clearly have put a lot of pressure on the automotive industry to deliver cleaner vehicles. But I mean, we can definitely we cannot replace petrol or diesel congestion with EV congestion. So now that we are rolling out these alternative EVs, we also need to think about and adopt new models of car ownerships in order to change our cities to be healthier and more sustainable.
Great, thank you, William.
This is going to be much more complex, and I hope that we can have the right energy propulsion system in the right place, that we have small electric vehicles in the cities, we have larger batteries or hydrogen or green fuels going the long haul, we have autonomous, we have car sharing. It's just going to be the right kind of vehicle for the right moment. And we started seeing that with electric scooters everywhere, which are somewhat liberating, but actually very nice to have.
Indeed, absolutely. It's changing, let's say it's changing the kind of culture on the street and the pavement. Not always good, but, with the bus system will have to find a norm of itself. But, clearly it's changing behaviors on the streets and the roads, if you like, in terms of the scooter revolution. Kevin.
So the future of mobility, I think where fuels are required, they're going to transition to sustainable fuels. So for example, long haul flight, transatlantic flights will move towards sustainable aviation fuels. And in those applications where electrification can come in board, what we're going to see is a significant reduction in the absolute fuel burn of those planes and of the industry. So whether it's a reduction through hybrid electric, or a full elimination of fuel burn through pure electric aircraft. This is the transition that we're already seeing beginning today, and that we'll continue to see over the coming decade.
Kevin, thank you. Last but not least, Eva.
I think that the revolution in mobility we've seen today is a consequence of this seeking for efficiency. It's more efficient to walk 1 kilometer than to take a taxi. It's more efficient to take a bike for 3 kilometers or a scooter. And we're seeking which is the most efficient mobility solution for the specific trip I want to make, right? So the more we are seeing more and more options in the market because we're constantly looking where the more efficient way to travel. Like if it's with an small electric airplane for a near short destination trip, it would make much more sense. So what we will see in the future is this multiplied by 10 or 100. We will see much more options to make every trip more efficient. I think that's the trend that we have today, and it will only get better.
Great, thank you all. I just hope policymakers are listening because, we've seen and heard and read the IPCC reports every year, get more and more challenging. They've said, you know, end is nigh, we're running out of time. And this time it's been the most, I suppose, forward they've been about the fact that time has literally run out. And now, on top of everything else, we have the largest or the most significant energy crisis this world has experienced for many, many decades. And it's of a different nature to the past. I just hope it doesn't stall you and stall the action that we need to take by political leaders choosing pragmatic fossil fuel solutions under the guise of transition. Let's hope that doesn't happen. Thank you all, and it's been a real pleasure. And I hope that those of you who have been watching and listening have found this as inspirational as I have, because really, I think about all of you and the things you're doing. I'm itching to find someone who's like, you know, a big, let's say, funder to say, bring all of you together. And actually, you might be able to create solutions. I hope that's possible. And we'll do our part to make sure that we can bring you together in many ways. Over the years, and bring your creativity to the, I suppose, the platform of policymakers and decision makers over the years to come. Thank you all very much. Thank you to our listeners and viewers for being here with us, and I hope that you found this really inspirational, as I said earlier. Keep an eye on our website for what we'll be doing in the future. This is probably our last event of the season from Friends of Europe. So it's really pleasing to be able to do something of this nature with all of you in terms of the debate that we're having, which is so critical right now in terms of energy, sustainability, and tackling climate change. So I want to thank all of you, thank all of you who've been patient and engaging with this. And as I said, keep an eye on our website. Thanks to all of you. Be safe, mind your distance, and take care. And thank you for being with us.